Good evening, and welcome to the October 2nd, 2017 meeting of the Merrimack School Board. First, I'd like to recognize that Mike Thompson is excused from tonight's meeting. And second, after the Pledge of Allegiance, the board will have a moment of silence in memory of our teacher, Nick Seymour, who passed away in a car accident last week. He was new to our district. It was his first year, but he already made such a great impact. We saw him being someone that would give a long-term impact to our district for many years, and this is a surprise. It's a tragedy, and our thoughts go out to his wife, Leah, and his 2 young children, and the Merrimack School family. So if you could please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And we're on to agenda item number 2, which is public participation. If anyone would like to speak, please come to the microphone, state your name and address for the record. And if you make sure the green light is on, please.
Name is Brian Stisser.
Is it on? Yeah.
Name is Brian Stisser of 56 Middlesex Road. And I was wanting to state my support for instituting full-day kindergarten in Merrimack. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Seeing no other Merrimack residents, we will close public participation, and we will go on to item number 3, which is the Honeywell Phase 5 Energy Project Proposal Overview. I invite to the table from Honeywell, Jim Lucy and Wally Howe. Thank you and welcome.
Hi, thank you for having us. My name is Jim Lucy, and I'm with Honeywell.
Is your mic glowing?
Yeah, I got the green light on.
Okay, yep.
Okay,
okay.
Yep. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. This is Wally Howe, who's with Honeywell as well, representing our engineering side of the business. Both Wally and I have been with Honeywell for a long time. We've had a chance to work with the Merrimack School District for a long time. And we're really here tonight to kind of talk about an ongoing relationship aspect of our project that started really in earnest back in '07 when we did a comprehensive energy audit of your facilities to evaluate your energy infrastructure. And you have done multiple phases off the result of that work to capitalize on energy savings opportunities as well as replacing equipment at the end of its useful life. And so the Phase 5 proposal really is consistent within the spirit of that, of identifying some opportunities to save additional dollars from the operating budget, identifying additional needs as equipment gets older that you need to focus some attention on at some point in the future, and then proposing to use some financing and funding ways to deal with some of these opportunities and needs that would not cost you any upfront or additional money outside of the current budget. So that's an introduction. I'd like to spend about 20 minutes or so, to the best I can, to go through a presentation to you that I think you had a copy of in your packets. We encourage questions, so if you have questions for Wally or I tonight, I encourage you to ask them anytime. This is meant to be informative, and I'll do our best to get through this in an efficient manner. Give us a sign or so if we need to speed it up or slow it down accordingly. So if we go to just the overview of the discussion, just want to spend 30 seconds, 60 seconds on just a little bit of background. I know there's some new board members since we visited with the board in previous discussions similar to this. So talk a little bit about our relationship over time. Talk about some of the objectives and the considerations that we put into this particular proposal for you. Really consistent with the spirit of other presentations and proposals that we've done. But I want to talk about that just to get grounded on those. Summarize really the opportunities, which I'll call ways to reduce operating costs. I know it's always a challenge to find discretionary spending, and that's really the spirit of this, is how do we look at areas of your operating budget, specifically energy and associated costs, and is there a more efficient and effective way to kind of spend those dollars, reinvest them into the building, or spend those surplus dollars on educational experiences. And then also really what I'll call needs. We'll talk a little bit about your buildings portfolio, really minus the middle school, which is the newer building in 04, and have a discussion really around some areas of need that we've highlighted. Being familiar with your buildings and spending a lot of time both on the business of Honeywell that Wally and I represent, as well as our service business. We did take the opportunity, Wally did specifically in the last week or so, to just go back and validate some stuff. So we'll talk about some of that and the recommendations that we'd have for you to consider going forward, whether that's here coming up in the next 6 to 12 months or sometime to consider in the years thereafter. And then I want to just talk about, I talked about how we can fund this. So what are some funding ways, funding scenarios? How do you fund that in the budget? How do we make this self-funded, and some different ways to consider that on a going forward basis with some example projects. So that's the scope of our discussion. A little bit of background. I'll just populate this in its entirety as you have it in your packet. So we began our relationship, I'm not sure the exact date, certainly well north of 2 decades. We've been working consistently with the Merrimack School District as an organization. The primary and consistent role of that has been supporting your heating, ventilating, air conditioning, and control systems in your buildings through contracted preventive maintenance services. And we'll also do individual jobs associated with retrofitting or upgrading systems. And as I mentioned, back in 07, we kind of entered into a different phase of a relationship with the school district, and we did a comprehensive energy audit of all 650,000 or so square foot of your buildings at the time. We look for ways to do kind of two primary objectives. How do we reduce existing costs, and then use some of those cost reductions to identify and implement ways to upgrade the learning environment in terms of comfort, in terms of safety, in terms of air quality. And so the result of some of the different phases you see here, starting in, hard to believe, June 07, was phase 1. It was primarily an energy efficiency focused project looking at how do we reduce energy demand, electric-wise, oil-wise at the time, and you did have some natural gas. And then in December of that year, we started to implement, we identified a lot of areas of need in your buildings where you had equipment of certain era as far as where it stands within its useful life. Also where you did not have any spaces in your buildings that had mechanical fresh air makeup. And so in December of 07, we implemented a project at the upper elementary school where we ventilated the majority of your occupied classroom spaces. And that was the result of that phase. And then in phase 3, we worked with the school district and Liberty Utilities to convert the balance of your buildings to natural gas. We also addressed a couple of end-of-life or deferred maintenance projects there. At the high school specifically, we replaced a chiller, and we also rebuilt your main air handling system. That's circa 1977, I believe, or 19. Yeah, that provides the primary ventilation to where you have fresh air makeup at the high school. And then this most recent summer, we replaced the kitchen and cafeteria heating and ventilation system at the high school. So really that's been an ongoing theme of the relationship, and we're here tonight to just talk about some ideas to consider in an ongoing way to try to reduce and contain costs, as well as upgrade and maintain assets for you to consider on a going forward basis. So contractually, one of the things just I want to highlight is when we did phases 1 and 2, we have an active energy guarantee with you. So part of that contract was for us to do the planning, design, and implementation of the work, but also contractually guarantee a certain level of cost efficiency in your budget, specifically to your energy line items. And so every year we're about ready to present year 8 report. We collect your billing information from an energy standpoint. We have someone who goes out to your site to validate the scope of work that we install then. Is it still operating the way it was designed? Is it functioning the way it should? And we develop a report of how do we do of the guarantee versus actual. So this is just a screenshot of how we're doing. To date, we've exceeded the guarantee by about $1.1 million. I think when we have this current report to come in, it'll be probably more like $1.3, $1.4 million where we've exceeded. So we're over-delivering as promised. And so not only does the investment kind of based upon this make sense from what you contractually entered into with us, but we've exceeded that by delivering additional savings, if you will. So this is just a screenshot of an annual report. If anyone's ever interested in those reports, those are provided to Matt and Tom on an annual basis. So objectives and considerations, I'll just read this one statement. It was really, a lot of this was from our vantage point consistent with the spirit of other projects, was to develop a comprehensive self-funded project that will reduce operating costs and provide capital improvements to improve building comfort and indoor air quality. So very consistent with the type of work that we've done in the prior 4 phases, and we'll talk about some of the areas of need and deficiency that we are proposing here tonight. So how would we fund that? Again, consistent with how we've done it before, we would look to further provide an annual guaranteed reduction in energy costs throughout your district of money that you're currently spending right now to Liberty Utilities or an electric provider. So it's not a matter of if you're going to spend the money, it's just how you spend it within your budget. We'll do that through basically technology upgrades in the energy efficiency space, and we'll talk about some specific ideas in a minute. There's also a lot of new rebates and grant programs that incentivize you to conserve energy. You might participate in that with some of them on the home side. So take advantage of those opportunities. You also have a series of what I'll call debt associated with some prior Honeywell phases. The original term of phase 1 and 2 was a 12-year lease purchase. That debt expires here in the next couple, 3 years. So you could consider refinancing that at a lower interest rate, take advantage of some of those savings, and then reinvest that over a little bit of term. We know the spirit is to be debt-free in FY24, so a lot of our options are really built around how do you maintain that goal of being debt-free in FY24, but still continue to address capital needs in a self-funded manner. And then the last one to consider is, if you want, at your own discretion, these are just ideas at this stage, is you have some middle school or high school additions debt that expires, I believe, in FY21, and you could have, again, in the spirit of being debt-free in FY24, you've got 3 years of allocations there that could be considered in this kind of concept formula. Benefits to consider. There's a variety of them. I mean, we're in a fairly low cost of money environment still. So from an interest rate standpoint, interest rates are far lower than they were in prior relationships, and so it's maybe a good opportunity to take advantage of that cost of money environment. There are additional operating cost savings through technology improvements and third-party funding, as I've highlighted. I think there's a lot of learning environment impacts. I mean, the schools are here for a main purpose of educating students, and you want to do that in the most conducive and effective environment. So some of the things that touch our world around air exchange and so on can help maximize your return on those investments around the student achievement and the participation process. I think implementing capital improvements without any additional funding, it's always a challenge of how do you've got a variety of buildings, a lot of square footage with different areas of equipment. A lot of that equipment has useful life, and you always have a high need. I know you're going to talk about it later in the agenda, your capital improvement budget for this coming fiscal year proposed budget. So you always have more need than you have funding. So how do we come up with some creative solutions to help you chip away at that at a faster pace without impacting the budget or the tax base? And then I think as part of that consideration, it helps, if we can do that and accomplish that, it helps stabilize future budgets down the road because you've got ahead of the curve to the extent possible, being proactive versus reactive. So this chart you have in your packet really just kind of the goal of this is to summarize the different facilities you have and the different eras of construction from the original construction date to different renovation phases. And I've also highlighted the square footage and a gross square footage for each building. So you can see you've got different generations of each building as you go through time. And part of this is the consideration of, I'll show you on the next page, is in the HVAC world, there's a group called ASHRAE, and it stands for American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning. And it's really the group that Wally and his peers would look to when they design buildings from a heating and ventilating standpoint. It's the code group, it's the group that sets the guidelines and the standards for the industry. And as part of that, they rate a median or a rated life of equipment. And so when you think of it, and a lot of this equipment should be out of sight, out of mind. It should be things you take for granted when you go in a school building. It's going to be comfortable. You're going to have the right air exchange, and these are the kind of conditions you'd expect, because this kind of stuff isn't necessarily part of your core mission. It just comes with the process or comes with the business. But when you consider some of the ages of these buildings, the high school, for example, it's hard to believe, but 1977 was 40 years ago. When you think of the 1970 wing or the 1965 wing, we're getting north of 50 years. So you'll see when we go to this page, this is the rated life of a lot of the systems you have in here in your buildings. So these would be installed systems, from boilers to fresh air makeup equipment, to exhaust systems, to pumps, all things that are part of your HVAC infrastructure that have a rated life. We would submit that you're doing very well beyond that and have lots of functioning equipment because you've invested in preventive maintenance. And we'll talk about some examples of that. And there's a lot of what we're not recommending that needs to happen now that's far exceeded its rated life, that doesn't need attention right now. But there are a fair number of things that are part of considerations that we'll present to you that are past the useful life, or just were not part of codes. When buildings were built, there was a different code standard around fresh air makeup. And so that comes to two areas: how much air exchange you need to exchange fresh air coming in and exhausting out. They rank that on cubic feet of air per minute. Different codes at different eras than they are now. And then sometimes they didn't require you to have fresh air makeup at all. So that's the result of a lot of your buildings has significant deficiencies in that area. Any questions so far? Okay. So opportunities and needs I'll classify into two areas. Again, opportunities to me are more ways to save tangible dollars from your operating budget today. We're confident that this is a possibility. We're doing lots of work in the LED space. LEDs really, for us, have arrived. They're at a price point where they make sense. They're at a technology advancement where they're proven and they last a long time. So we're confident there's a good chance to retrofit all of your lights, interior, exterior, to LED technology. It also helps reduce maintenance costs because it extends the life of that equipment significantly. Some people are actually affected by fluorescent lights as well that actually turn on and off and flicker. LED technology really advances things like that, where sensitivities are there, where you really have a difficulty time being affected by the flickering. So different benefits of that beyond savings. There are expansions to a building control system. So you've made an investment in that technology over time. That allows for Tom and his team to do remote diagnostics of buildings, adjust temperatures, troubleshoot problems from off-site. The systems that we have installed have limits of how far they go based upon the equipment in your buildings, so there'd be a way to expand that and drive some additional savings. There's miscellaneous energy efficiency improvements that I'm happy to address with questions that weren't available when we did the first project in 2007 that we'd proposed to evaluate and implement. And then there's renewable energy solutions. I think the most relevant one here would be solar photovoltaics, where you put panels, for example, on your roof or in a parking lot, and you take advantage of the sun energy to generate electricity. And there's programs now through the state that support grants. So those are things that could be evaluated as part of this effort as well. On the opportunity side, we would say that there would be opportunities to further what you did back in December 2007 at the upper elementary school by mechanically ventilating classrooms. There's additional areas which we'll go into more details here momentarily. We know in your capital plan you have money targeted for window replacements, roof replacements. Those are candidates that could be evaluated and implemented through such a structure as this to help stretch your capital dollars further. And then just general end-of-life replacements. You have a variety of equipment that really needs attention sooner rather than later. There is a chunk that can be deferred for 10 plus years, for example, but there's some stuff that really needs TLC sooner rather than later. And you're going to face that in two ways. It's just going to break, and you're going to find a way to fix it, or you're going to plan the replacement, and it's always better to plan it because it's more cost-effective that way. So I want to go through a series of slides, and I'll try to do this fairly efficiently. As a result of our experience in your buildings and knowledge of your locations, and Wally's effort in the last 2 weeks, of going back through over a series of several days of your buildings, we really came together with a high-level recommendation of where we see priorities more short-term from our definition. And those really narrowed down to from beyond the opportunities, which we see as savings, things that should fund themselves and justify themselves on the surface. On the needs side, it would be where we see you have buildings that do not have fresh air mechanical ventilation capabilities. They only have the ability to exhaust air, so just an exhaust fan only in a lot of those spaces. Or you have equipment that's really was never designed to meet current standards, and also really is at the end of its life in more of a sooner rather than later standpoint. So we're going to go through each building quickly. Again, if you have questions, please ask, to kind of highlight where we see the priorities right now, capital improvement-wise. So the high school, as you can see here, we've got about 57, close to 60 different classroom spaces that have just exhaust-only capabilities throughout them. In 1965 unit ventilators, that wing does have some ventilation, but that equipment is north of 50 years and really should be looked at for replacement at some point in the near future. And then we've got 1977 D-wing air handlers that we think are probably needing some attention sooner rather than later. And then in the G-wing, which is the most recent addition that's closest to the superintendent's office, that was just built with one boiler. And so typically schools are designed with 2 boiler plants, where if you have a failure, you have ability to have a backup. And so that's an example where, similar to the Master Cola complex, where you have just one boiler for part of the elementary school, you could look at either adding a backup boiler or connecting the 2 different boiler plants for redundancy. So these are some simple, yes. I'm sorry.
So questions on the high school?
No,
Cinda?
just a quick clarification regarding the blue. The blue.
Yep.
Oh, those are the class. Well, it looks like there's some that are classrooms that are not in blue, right?
The
So
blue would be the areas that you have that are ventilated now.
Okay.
And the white or the non-blue would be areas that have no fresh air ventilation
Okay.
now. Yep.
Thanks.
And the blue areas have ventilation, but it may not be adequate, totally adequate ventilation, but at least they have some forced makeup that's a lot better than the white.
Correct. Like the 1965 unit ventilators in the high school are in the blue category.
Yeah, in the F section.
Yep.
Okay, great, thanks.
So these are just simple graphics that we took some floor plans that I think candidly probably need to be upgraded around some nomenclature on there. They're from a more back in 2008 era, but we felt like just from a graphical standpoint they might help highlight where these non-fully ventilated spaces are in your buildings. And then this is the other section of the high school, the second and third story one, and you can see that the vast majority of this is not fully ventilated. And then moving to the
Actually, are there any questions on the high school? I did have one.
yes.
And I know, and it will probably resonate in the other presentations as well. We're talking fully ventilated, so we're bringing in fresh air. We're talking about new boilers and systems like that. With the exchange of air, does that also lend itself to, if the school district has the opportunity to expand air conditioning capabilities, will it set itself up for that type of infrastructure, or is that separate?
No, it certainly it can, Shannon. I think knowing that out of the gate is a different design in terms of, if we're going to go air conditioning, we may have a larger ductwork. There may be different design considerations we need to think about where you want to air condition, where a priority would be. But I think if you're going to be doing these kind of upgrades, the time to consider that would be in the planning and the design phase. Yep.
Okay, Cinda?
Yeah, I know. I'm sure Shannon probably agrees with me because we were both there.
Slow roasting at parent night? Yeah,
Yeah,
that's good times.
I had like sweat dripping down my face, and it was really oppressive, I thought. I'm kind of like a parakeet. You guys may find that hard to believe when it comes to lack of ventilation. So, I was in a couple of classrooms, and they can't open the windows at night because of, I think, security reasons. So therefore, they can't even get the cold air in at night. And then I thought, pretty oppressive. So this is really timely. I think to have this information to start that conversation, because I personally wouldn't be able to learn sitting in that environment.
And we definitely every year have had, actually Mr. Fabrizio is probably on the edge of his seat right now. In our budget sessions, we usually have split unit air conditioning in our budgets because we have to make sure those medically sensitive children also have an environment that's safe for them to learn in. So that's also.
And I will say we were there at the end of the day, so a lot of the
Yeah.
systems could have been turned off, and it's not the normal course of the day and the way that it operates, but
It's been a little bit warmer, depending upon if it was more recent. I think, people are affected differently by ventilation and air exchange. So from a temperature, humidity standpoint, or elevated CO2, the primary function of air exchange in here, bringing fresh air in and exhausting it, is carbon dioxide levels. As we sit here tonight, we're all breathing, they go up. And people are affected differently from that. That's the primary reason, is to flush the system, keep CO2 down, and any other kind of volatile organic compounds that may be in the air. That exchange keeps them at levels that people aren't affected. And when you don't have that and things like CO2 get higher, you get tired, you get sleepy. There's different effects that can happen as a result of that. And those can be individual based, or they can just be in totality. I think you also have to look at, when you go in a building, and that the conditions it in. If there's a lot of students in there, these conditions are going to be elevated. If it's in the middle of the winter, when it's more closed up, these kind of things are going to be elevated versus spring or warmer seasons where you can have windows open and so on. Yep.
Yes, Linda?
And then I guess a question for Matt: how often do we test? How often do we test like air quality or things like that? In the course of a day, or what information do we have regarding air quality, and to understand the safety as it affects our students across the board?
Well, the last time we had done full air quality testing was with Honeywell X amount of years ago. We don't, as a normal course of business, test air quality. We can monitor temperatures in every room and seeing how the air exchange is going, so to speak, with the computerized system that we have through Honeywell. But as far as testing goes, we haven't done that since the last time we did a project.
So how often, in your line of work, do you recommend that these type of tests are done every so often, or based on your experience with these type of systems, what recommendations might you have for a district such as us as it relates to air testing and air quality?
Yeah. Well, first qualify that we are not industrial hygienists. We're not trained to do this or provide advice. I think it really, not to kind of give you a around the bend, it really depends upon individual situations. So for example, at your middle school, you have a 2004 system that was designed to meet current ventilation standards. As long as maintenance activities are occurring on the system, filter changes are occurring, and as long as you don't have things like leaks coming in and so on that can cause problems, there may not be a need for regular checks at some frequency. If you have other situations where you've got complaints that are driven, you don't have the right mechanical systems in place, maybe you're not following the right best practices, you can also get into chemical storage, other things that occur in a building. It may warrant more regular or more specialized testing. EPA, I remember years ago, put out a Tools for Schools program, and it was all about kind of a best practices around air quality and testing and practices to follow and so on. So certainly part of this effort could be a more expanded kind of focus around that, existing conditions, and then some best practices going forward as well.
So we can continue to look at that, as a group. Didn't we do something at Thornton's a couple years ago?
Yeah, we did. It was driven. It was driven by, as Jim and Wally said, by some conditions that were symptomatic of some of the staff in that area, and to kind of make sure that we were doing our due diligence, we did do some air quality testing at Thornton's Ferry specifically to address a specific concern. So once that testing was done, everything came back fine. There was one area I believe we had to look at and make some modifications to, but other than that, everything did come back fine at Thornton's Ferry.
So, perhaps I think it might be a good idea to look at our other schools. I mean, once every, the gazillion years certainly makes sense. I like to be dramatic sometimes, but
That's good.
once every, so many years is certainly not excessive, just to go in there and get a spot check on what we're seeing, and check kind of the health of the air. What it tells me is that if there was one area at Thornton's, is that newer than Reed's Ferry?
Same, both the
They're
same
both the
age.
So, but they're very similar, almost exactly the same,
Yeah.
other than flipped-flopped in their setup, that maybe there's an area at Reed's Ferry as well. So I think that we should check that. I don't know how anyone else feels about it, but I think that certainly makes sense, particularly as we go into these conversations and what we need and what we can do to improve our systems.
Yeah, that certainly could be something that can be part of our repertoire going forward every X amount of years to run a school and do an air quality test on it.
Yeah, I
Not
think
an issue.
Yep. And actually, that leads me to a question part of your presentation earlier about opportunities and needs. It was building control upgrades, and remote diagnostics is the note I put down. Would you be able to do air quality as part of those remote diagnostics, or only things like temperature?
No. So one of the areas of technology that's improved since we did some of the energy retrofits previously, phase 1 and 2 in particular, is carbon dioxide sensing is actually an energy conservation strategy now. And so ultimately, I think a lot of what we would recommend for inclusion in a project, and regardless of how you wanted to phase it, is we would put CO2 sensors in. CO2 sensors do two things. It allows us to monitor CO2 levels and ventilate, where we're always doing it per code, and we're to keep the quality conditions where they need to be. It also allows us not overventilate. So you can picture a building that has different student loads in each individual day. So you're going to design to maybe 25 students or whatever the max capacity would be, but you might only have 10 one class or 20 another class, and so it allows you to ventilate at the right levels all the time, but not overventilate. So that would inherently, Shannon, be built into a system upgrade for the controls of allowing us to monitor the CO2 constantly. So
That is already in some of your classrooms now, and some of your bigger rooms that have individual air handling units, such as your gyms and stuff like that you can control them with one CO2 sensor. Then that way, if a gym only has 10 students in there, you don't need to bring in all of that outside air because you're always monitoring it. That's one of the reasons we did it, but you also can monitor what's going on with them right through our direct digital control system.
So if you go to, you mentioned the two ferry schools, so that's actually...
wait, Andy had a question as well before.
I'd actually like to, we're talking about post-retrofit monitoring CO2. I don't want this to sound weird, but I'd almost like to see some monitoring go on before we invest the money in this, to see where we're at as a starting point,
And that,
to find out where we are. And I know we can't have maybe automated it at that point, but maybe we can arrange to have some level of monitoring going on in the different buildings, to see where we're at, to put confidence for the board as well as to the residents that this is an investment that we need to be making. Because what you're doing with a lot of these suggestions is going to the next level, and there'll be a lot of people who will say, well, it's worked fine for the last 30 years, why do we have to add ventilation? I think having some proof would go a long way to help to sell it.
yeah, understand.
That's what I was thinking along those lines.
And that, to me, would be part of the scope of the next steps, is to further evaluate some of the conclusions that we've made, do at least preliminary design around what design solutions make the most sense in each building, and then do development of a baseline, which part of that development would include testing. We're getting to a time of year that you can actually do accurate testing. You want to be in the heating mode where people aren't just opening the windows and overheating. So I think once we get into a little bit colder weather, which is coming sooner rather than later, it's the time we can start to do some of that testing and validate that. Yeah. But even without that, you can logically validate that if you're based upon what you have for systems in a lot of your classrooms, and the ability to exchange air. If you put the right number of students in there, those levels are probably going to be elevated. And certainly as you get through the longer part of the day, the buildup occurs, from 8 in the morning to 2, you're going to have a different level of conditions inside a space. Yeah. Yes.
My only challenge back is that with many of the voters and taxpayers that we work with,
Yes.
they will need that added data, if you will, to prove that fact.
Understand.
Because those, as you said, those buildings have been there since the 60s.
Yes.
And students have graduated through, and I know there's different qualities now. So we as a board many times are challenged to defend what we're asking to spend. So.
Yes. I completely agree with your point.
Yep.
Yes.
Some of your buildings have changed since the 60s. I'm sure you've tried to save energy by tightening up your buildings. When you got cracks in your windows and you can look out through those cracks, you're getting ventilation through that. You've got an exhaust fan that's sucking air out of the room, which is what a lot of these buildings have. It's just exhaust. So to get that exhaust out of the room, you have to bring air in. If you've tightened up your rooms in your building tight enough so that you're not getting that leakage in to get it exhausted out, that will change your rooms compared to what they were 30 years ago. Same way, weather stripping on your doors and stuff like that. That tightens up your building more. You actually can create, some of your air quality problems by tightening up and trying to save energy on some things.
And another way with Wally's point is that we don't want you to think you have some ability to ventilate all of your classrooms through exhaust. So to Wally's point, you're sucking air out, and it's coming in, so sometimes you can have negative pressures that occur as a result of that. I think this part of this thought process or consideration is you bringing it in the right way, where it's targeted ventilation and it's not just coming in through anytime someone opens a door, it's finding it's pulling air or coming through windows or wherever it may be. So it's more that's why you design modern ventilation systems to heat and condition air in a designated space versus just pulling it from wherever. So to just move along in the 2 Ferry schools, so again, those are really sister schools. They're very similar to each other, really identical. So what we're going to say here in Reed's Ferry is the same in Thornton's Ferry. So you can see there's a number of classrooms that are in that exhaust-only condition. We know that there is an interest and a need to have an HVAC, so with air conditioning in the front office area or the office kind of complex in both buildings. And then we're just highlighting some other more priority work of older equipment or some needs that could be considered here. There should be considered sooner rather than later. So if you kind of look at the layout of the Reed's Ferry, same for Thornton's Ferry, it's really the bulk of the building. The 2 additions that occurred, I believe, back in 1997 is where you're getting the ventilated areas. And then the 68 section is where it's really just exhaust only. Yep. So Thornton's Ferry is the same. And then the upper elementary school. So we did the majority of this back in December 2007-ish timeframe, but you still have some exterior spaces, as you can see in the floor plan, that are not ventilated the way they should be. And then you can see some other areas of aging equipment throughout this complex, including back to the 1965 era systems. And so here's the screenshot of the upper elementary school location of one view, where it's ventilated and where it's not, and you can see the sections of the school. And then this would be another area of upper elementary school as well, where you have ventilation versus not. All the ventilated areas in here were done in that prior project. Questions on the upper elementary school? Okay. And then James Mastercola Elementary School. So most of this site of where you have ventilation is from the eras of 1987, 1997, and additions in 2003. So the core part of this building is that of the unventilated spaces dates back to the original 61 and 63 sections. And you can see the graphic here of where it's ventilated and where it's not. And some of the replacements that we're recommending here is really equipment that's far exceeded its useful life and should be considered at some point as part of the capital funding process. Any questions on the elementary school? Okay. So I want to move now to project funding sources, and I kind of label it as existing debt, because that would be an option to consider if you wanted to kind of expand the potential scope of a self-funded project, is to look at your existing debt portfolio, and at least on the Honeywell side, would there be an interest and an appetite to refinance and reinvest some of that out to that 2024 window, or even some options beyond, as well as some other existing debt. So first on the Phase 5 project funding and financing assumptions. So in some of these scenarios, and these are just conceptual examples, so to me on a going forward basis, we would be looking for direction, not necessarily picking a project size or a scope. It would be more or less providing some parameters around that and the merits of funding that you want us to evaluate. And then we would go out, do the baseline work around the quality testing, and further develop this kind of proposal based upon direction, both in terms of funding sources and considerations around debt term, if you will. So we're looking at an assumption here that we could save about another $150,000 a year in energy. A good chunk of that would come through LED lights and some other technologies, but we think that's a reasonable target. Whether we're exactly at 150 to be determined, but that would be part of what we'd evaluate in the next step. There'd be some level of guaranteed reductions in your current energy costs that we are confident would occur. We look at, in this current estimate, generating a one-time, because it's all upfront money, utility rebate of $150,000. I think that's a very conservative number. We're just doing a similar project like this in another school district, similar size, very close to here, and we've been probably more like $250,000 for a one-time rebate. That excludes, if we looked at renewable energy solutions like solar, there's some pretty significant grants that are on moratorium from the state right now, but we anticipate will open up that can expand the amount of money for one-time funding sources. We're looking at, if you looked at just going at an option to be debt-free in FY24, which is about a 6-year financing term, we're estimating about 2% cost of money with that. That's arguably maybe a little bit conservative, but it would be a pretty low cost of money with that type of short-term debt. Even if you got out into the 15 to 20-year term, candidly, with your financials, you would be much higher than 2% in today's interest rate environments. Very, very good rates are available in today's climate. And then we looked at, as funding sources, the consideration of what I'll call refinancing Phase 1 and 2 debt. You currently had about a 4.5% interest rate on that. Granted, you're close to the end of the payment cycle, so you're paying more principal and interest, but there is still a higher interest rate there that could be refinanced. And then considering with Phase 3, which was the natural gas phase, that's paid off at the end of this fiscal year. You may have already paid it off, but you're paying about $180,000 of the year there. You could consider continuing to reallocate that in your budget to help fund some of these capital investments that we're talking about tonight. And then you also have, for existing debt in that 2024 landscape, the middle school or the high school bond for the additions is currently about a $300,000 payment, and you could have about 3 years of debt reallocation there to still be debt-free in FY24. And then I think you're pretty familiar with your existing debt. I've touched on a lot of it, but I think it all ends with the middle school bond expiring in FY24. So again, there's multiple considerations of how you can still maintain that goal, but still self-fund a fair amount of improvements that allows you to be more cost-effective and address some critical capital needs. So we developed here, just for conversation, 3 project scenarios. What I'll call scenario number 1 is a self-funded project scenario that we're estimating based upon all of those assumptions in the prior phase to be around $3.75 million. Again, not looking for upfront money. This is all be funded within the budget based upon variables and how much opportunity we have based upon a next stage assessment. So this includes 6-year financing through a lease purchase, which can be board authorized only, with the term ending in FY24, so that's June of 24, with the first payment starting in July 18. And the funding sources here are the utility rebates, the additional energy savings, and then the reallocation of Honeywell affiliated debt. And then if we looked at scenario 2, the difference here is this gets you a little more capital buying power in a self-funded formula. It goes from about $4.5 million based upon the assumptions that we have. And this simply adds in the high school addition debt reallocation for the years. Still be debt-free at the end of that FY24 mark, but would potentially allow you to have about $4.5 million worth of capital that you could self-fund through existing budgetary resources. And then the last example I said, and again, to me, part of tonight or future meetings is not to necessarily pick a scenario. These are just illustrations of what is possible here around self-funded projects. If you looked, and this is more like scenario 1, but it's instead of you being debt-free in FY24, that you would look at doing a new 15-year lease purchase example, just reallocating and refinancing Honeywell-only debt. So money that, when you think about it, once upon a time was back in your utility line items before you did anything. It was in the Eversource line item. It was in the Liberty Utilities or the fuel oil line item. So if we never did any of this work, it would have been back in your budget, if you will. Carrying that out to a 15-year term, and that could free up, we're estimating, between $9 and $10 million of capital to self-fund. And that kind of buying power would go a long ways towards proactively addressing some of the capital needs that we're talking about on a holistic nature, so district-wide. Any questions on these conceptual project examples?
Are there any questions from the board? I do have one.
Okay.
And that is taking everything you put in, obviously that's where the numbers are coming from. And as you have mentioned, it's actually my note on the front. It's why would we, reinvest? Why would we refinance money that's probably mostly principal anyway? So that was, my note for tonight. But what's the actual cost of those projects prior to the 2% for bonding? Say we go with the 6-year plan.
These are all assuming actual costs. In interest in these examples would be. I developed some cash flows, and I said, okay, if we borrow at 2% over 6 years, we could self-fund a principal project size of the amounts estimated here in these scenarios. So interest would be calculated above and beyond that. So your total project cost, principal and interest, Shannon, for scenario 1
Just
would
principal at this point, based
principal
on what
is those amounts shown.
Okay.
Yep.
And so I guess the question is 3.75, 4.5, and 9.5. That's within. I would assume that to be with incurring the bond, not having 3 different levels of investment in infrastructure. So I guess if you could clarify the proposal, maybe I'm missing something. But if I'm thinking if it was 3.75 million, and that's taking into account the debt from the first Honeywell project, taking into account that we say we take that out. So is it really 2.65 million then?
No, it's actually 3.75 is the new project principal amount.
Okay.
You'd have $877,000 of phase 1 and 2 debt that still needs to be paid off.
Sure.
So
I'm
that's
saying we left them alone and it wasn't part of your proposal. So I'm really looking at what's the number that we'd be paying
3.75
for the infrastructure.
Yep. And that's with the assumption that you continue to reallocate or reinvest the payment amount through the FY24 period. So if you removed the refinance and reinvestment piece in its entirety, the amount would be far less. It would really be looking then at in this particular conceptual example, $150,000 a year in annual savings plus utility rebates would be the funding source, if you will, if you remove debt refinancing or reallocation out of the equation in its entirety. And to me, these are just meant to be illustrations. They're not meant to pick a project. They're not meant to pick a term. It's meant to give you some ideas consistent with prior phases of how we've been able to self-fund work without impacting the budget. I think the next phase of this, with your direction, would help drive the parameters you want us to follow in terms of return on investment or funding sources that are part of that definition of self-funded. But I certainly, the intent of these illustrations was they were meant to show the potential. They were not meant to drive, say, this is the specific proposal.
Yep. Andy?
So obviously the details behind the 3.75 in terms of what we would get, what impacts, is going to be the rubber hits the road part of this, and that's, for me, understanding how far we'd get with the 3.75 versus how far we get with the next one up would be the key. So I would be very interested in seeing that next step, just to understand sort of what the cost would give us, and that's where the monitoring and understanding where the bigger issues are is important to understand, at least for me, hitting those first. But we as a district need to talk about capital debt, because you've made some assumptions in terms of keep being debt-free by FY24 and funding models and rolling and things like that. And there's other drivers that we have as a district for bonded debt in this time frame that we need to still discuss. So this is just another complexity to that discussion. So.
Yeah, no, great points. I think, so 2 comments on that. Debt is debt. We're assuming a lease purchase versus a general obligation bond. That's what you've used in prior debt for Honeywell projects. And so difference there is really with a lease purchase, you probably know all this, you have a non-appropriation clause. So rate-wise, very competitive. You're not going to see a big difference at all. But because the non-appropriation clause, you as a school board and from a legalese standpoint can vote on and enter into lease purchase debt versus bondiness, which goes to the voters. So there's difference there, but and how that's looked upon as far as the accountants and so on is for someone else. But debt is debt.
Well,
as far as
debt is debt. You're right.
Yep.
And whether I remember when we did the proposal for the gas retrofit, we did treat it. We called it debt, but it wasn't really. It was just a different way of accounting it. So it was more of a simple warrant article to do it because it wasn't really a bond at that point. But the key is as we look at other projects that we need to do, obviously we need to pay attention to this, but also look at the bigger picture with those other expenses as well.
Correct.
So you've wetted our whistle or taste bud, so to speak, with this, right? But there's a bigger picture that we're looking at, and understand, in my mind at least, understanding the details of what you address at those. I mean, you go all the way from 3.75 to $10 million. Well, that's a big swing, and and there's a lot of different things, and you've given a lot of exposure areas or opportunities, as you call them, across all the different schools. So the question is, if we do 3.75, we get A, B, and C, and then if we do the next one, we start to go into this area. So those, to me, those are the kind of things that I would need to know before I could go to the next.
And I would certainly expect, I mean, I think process-wise where we're at is to define all of that with a level of accuracy is a considerable investment of time and resources. And so we would be looking for not certainty from you, but direction and some level of authorization before we enter into that next level of investment. So you're correct. I've just simply looked at ideas to take, okay, here's the current way that you're paying for operating expenses. Here's the current way you're kind of looking at capital, which is above and beyond outside of this. These are just, arguably all this money here is money that you're going to continue to have in the next handful of fiscal years. You can't touch it right now because it's in your energy line items, it's in your debt line items. This is an idea of a different way to reduce and free up some of that to expand your access to capital resources. So, but I completely agree to you that we don't have the blanks filled in of how far will each one of these take you. So this is meant to be an overview presentation to give you the idea of the possibilities. The next step would be seeking some direction from you around us going out and then giving you the specificity that you desire in terms of what is going to cost what we can accomplish based upon parameters, and then also to go back and validate some of the air quality things that you talked about as well, which we're more than willing to do. We've got the resources ready to embark on that effort, but that would be part of that next step.
Okay, I have Marge and then Matt.
So all I was going to say is that when Jim sat with Matt and me, we wanted him to really do this projection so that you could see what it was we needed to address over time. And the thought would be that we would let the presentation just set, if you will, for you to be able to stew, right? But to be able to take it under advisement and then come back perhaps on November 6th, which is about a month out, and ask you, do you wish to go in a particular direction? And then we'll drill down and do something further. But tonight was about presenting you with all the possibilities and to address those particular areas that are really going to need to come to the surface at some point. We already had put in window replacement on a minimal level, I mean, starting at the high school. We had talked about lighting a lot, and we've done a lot of little individual efforts depending on particular students and their needs and their IEPs. And I've heard many of you talk about ventilation over time. So everything's been mentioned, if you will. It's trying to come up with a plan that makes sense, you know, how to embrace this. Yet at the same time, we sat with Jim. He understands the capital improvement plan and what our commitments already are, too. Mm-hmm.
So really quick, given your time frame for the next meeting, do you believe that we would have anything in a time frame to consider for the next year's operating budget? I mean, things are getting tighter. I mean, because if you talk about continuing to FY 18 to 19, wait, no, it would be FY 19 at that point. Would we be able to act on a budget recommendation given what you've started?
Oh, right. I'm not sure, I would say, because I really heard tonight you talk in terms of the need for baseline data, and I want to make sure that that's gathered in a proper fashion because that's going to serve us well over time. But I think Jim and Wally sitting here and listening to your queries certainly can take it under advisement and also say, you know, a next best step might be, that kind of thing. So the more important thing is, and I had just shared this with Shannon today, is that we're hopeful about going before the planning board with an approved capital improvement plan on November 7th. So you see how everything is kind of coming together. But anything will be better than where we were, meaning all of these elements have been looked at, and so I think that's an important thing, is that Wally has gone around to all of our buildings to take a look-see. And because of the maintenance that was pointed out that has been done by the boards prior to you and you, that puts us in good stead. I mean, I think, Jim, you said you do a lot of school systems and that you and the townspeople should be very pleased with what you've done because you've maintained these systems and they're way beyond, in some cases, their useful life because of what's been done, because of the money that's been spent. Did you not say that?
Very much is true, and we can say firsthand of working with a lot of entities in New Hampshire and other areas, that's not consistent. And there's lots of times you don't even meet the rated life because you just react to stuff. And this, one thing I want to add is that, again, we were not looking to define a course, and I was never thinking this would compete with your capital budget. I was thinking this would be complementary or additive to the capital budget in a way to, you know, you're always struggling with, you know, you've got all kinds of ideas and needs, but just not enough resources and time. And I think one of the things that I see this doing, it helps fill the gap of time, money, and resources to help, you know, evaluate things further, not compete with the capital budget, but allow you to consider cost-effective ways budgetarily to move the ball up the field a little bit further in a little faster pace. And part of the next stage of evaluation could be coming back with a series of recommendations, maybe doing this in chunks as you want to consider it, but possibly there'd be some examples where you could consider doing it in larger chunks. So that, to me, would be part of that next comprehensive audit or planning phase that we could do fairly rapidly at your direction.
Excellent. Matt, and then Naomi.
Okay. There is something that Jim spoke of, and I'm really not sure if it resonated. When we first did the Honeywell retrofit and then the natural gas conversion, they had a non-appropriation clause in the contracts, and we went before the voters with the warrant article. The law has changed since then, so if you have a non-appropriation clause in your contract, you could take the first year's lease payment and just put it in your budget without going to the voters for a warrant article to approve a multi-year lease purchase. Now, me, having worked here for a number of years and would love to continue to work here for a couple of years.
The Merrimack Way, Matt.
The Merrimack Way would never, ever, put you in that situation. But I just wanted you to know there is a change. Okay, that's all.
We can, but it doesn't mean we will.
That's
Basically, is what you're telling me. There you go. Naomi?
I just wanted to say thank you. As one of the newer board members, this was marvelous as a walkthrough and getting a sense of what's been done in the past and the history of this. I'm as cognizant as anyone else of the need to not spend money just because it sounds like a good idea to spend the money. But I like very much the way that the district has been getting ahead of maintenance on a variety of fronts, and it's nice to still have our eye on that. So thank you very much.
Well, you're very welcome. Thanks for the feedback. Yeah.
Cinda?
I agree. I think it's helpful the way you've laid it out, and I love 3 options. It's like a classic go-to for me, getting 3 options, a couple of different ideas, just to see kind of how that plays out. But I think at the end of the day, what we're really looking for collectively is just that cost-benefit analysis, because that's ultimately what it comes down to is, what we need to do to stay ahead of the game, to continue to stay ahead of the game as we have proactively, versus, what happens if we don't. All of those data facts really help us, I think, as we make a decision going forward and in how we spend the budget and how our taxpayers spend the budget, really understanding, if you don't do this, this is what might be at risk. This will fail. It'll cost you this many $1 million instead of $100,000, or anything like that really helps us, I think, get a perspective around the data and around the needs that we need to have to be proactive. So thank you for coming today.
You're welcome. And I think the intent of getting direction in the next step is that cost-benefit phase, if you will, more detailed assessment, putting numbers to stuff. You will define cost-benefit from different ways. You're going to measure LED lighting one way. You're going to measure equipment at the end of a life or an air quality thing a different way, because those aren't things that are going to be driven by an energy savings. They're driven by, you've got to replace it at some point, or what's the price tag you put on a better environment. So thank you for the feedback.
I would say that I'm intrigued by the idea of some renewable options, what that would look like, what
Somebody's not here.
how that kind of plays into the overall big picture, and how we go forward. So thank you.
So there's one member who's not here, and this member who's not here was a heavy advocate for solar when he first came on the board. So if he's watching this, well, he's probably not watching it live. He'll watch it on tape delay. His ears will probably perk up and want to talk about, because I think he walked away thinking that solar might not have been a viable option, and you brought it up. So I think that that's something else that he may ask that you look at or include as part of it as well. I can't speak for him, but I'm just speculating. But just to give you an idea, there is a board perspective on renewable that's also out there. So
I think even when I was on planning and building when we first met, I was wanting the new SAU SPED office that we talked about in 2005 to be a green building. And that was back when there was, they were throwing money at the problem like nobody's business. So those were good times. We weren't ready for it then, but those were good times. But I think a couple things that I want to take away from this is we have spent a lot of money with you, but sometimes you have to spend money to make money, and I think that's exactly what this arrangement did for us. So what we spent, we had a cost avoidance of, again, $1.4 million. I think that needs to be said. Over 8 years, we avoided $1.4 million that we would have spent other places for utilities with our investment with Honeywell. So we were going to spend it anyway. We did it for cost avoidance that has long-term impacts beyond what we'll be paying for. The town did the same thing with LEDs. All of our streetlights are now LED, and they saved a lot of money. And there's still, every day, they save a lot of money by doing that. That's not lost on us either. So it's already being done in this town because of a cost avoidance. So spending money to make money, making those upgrades to make a long-term savings. But again, I think we've always talked about institutional lighting and how it's never always flattering. So having something that's more conducive for learning is great. To the next note, I would say it's more about us not being financial advisors, and that is, it'd be interesting I'd be interested to know the budget dollars and price points on different amounts of money at the 2% bond. That's more of a math thing, so we have the calculator with glasses over there, and he's very good about giving us a perspective on bond rates and what money we have in the bond rate and what it will get us. I think that will help us make informed decisions as well, based upon how we can get cost avoidance to also offset those bond payments. So I think, again, we still have a lot of moving parts, and having that sweet spot price point that says that we're going to get cost avoidance investments to get savings and improvements is going to help us to make a well-informed decision on our end as well. So even though you're not going to be at every meeting unless you really feel like it, but we can keep you up to date too. But I think that having those data points are going to help us as well. So I think there's a lot to talk about with the square footage. We have about the equivalent of 15 Walmarts for our school district buildings. That we have a lot to take care of, and let's we'll try to stay ahead of it and do the right thing. So, and we appreciate your help in getting that done.
Okay, thank you for your time very much. Yep.
Thank you both. And we are on to our next item, which I covered with my spreadsheets, and that is the new school board policy. And it's the first reading of data/records retention policy with Director of Student Services, John Fabrizio. I did that right, John? Awesome.
Thank you and good evening. Something tonight to talk about is record retention, and I've explained the last couple of times I've been here is there's been some changes in New Hampshire regulations and our laws, and on March 23rd, 2017, the New Hampshire Board of Education adopted revised rules in New Hampshire. And in doing so, it's led us to a few changes that you'll see me probably a few times coming forward to make in some of my procedural manual and things that have come before. But now I have a new set of laws to adhere to and go on. And as I talked about last time at our when we talked about our annual compliance report, what was some of the difficulty around that is we had a new set of rules kind of put as that we had to be compliant to a new set of rules versus the old. So this is one of those changes. I'm going to walk through a little bit of the history right now, kind of what happened, and then we'll talk about the policy, if that's okay. So as I said, on March 23rd, 2017, State Board of Education voted unanimously to have new rules under education with children with disabilities. And these rules are the way that the state implements federal and state special education laws. With these adoptions were made after an 18-month period where they took input from both parents and educators and lawmakers and really came in and listened to public hearings and different stakeholder groups to be able to come up with a way of really vetting the whole process through the different groups to really come up with a set of rules that they felt comfortable with before they went to the board, and they did pass unanimously. One of the requirements in those laws was that each LEA, which is school district, will provide a policy and adopt a policy on records retention and the destruction of special education records. Neither students' records cannot be destroyed before the 21st birthday without written or unless there's written consent from the parents. And all these records need to be maintained until the 21st birthday, either in written or electronic form. A private provider may also have the same thing to keep these records along the way. And when we do so, we must maintain a copy of, even after the 25th birthday, we have to keep a copy of their IEP to their 60th birthday. And that's by law, just the IEP itself to their 60th birthday. And that's the law requirement. So, and then anytime we do destroy these records, we have to inform the public of this. We have to put it out in the papers. We have to inform them we're doing this. And also, when a student turns 18 years old, we have to make sure they know the copy of the law. And annually at the IEP, when a person will either graduate or turn 21, we have to inform the parent or guardian or student who is an adult of this process when it goes forward. So that's kind of the background about why I'm here today to talk to you about this change. And then I have the policy. So Before I go through, would you like me to go through at this time and read the policy, or is that what you'd like me to do? Okay. I will do so. So my reading aloud test late at 9 o'clock at night, here I go. Okay. Data records retention. So the superintendent shall develop a procedure for a record retention system that is in compliance with RSA 189:29 and the Department of Education regulations. The procedure shall ensure that all pertinent records are stored safely and stored in such a duration as required by law. Additionally, the superintendent shall develop procedures necessary to protect individuals' rights and preserve confidential information. Special education records. The district shall retain a student's special education record until at least the student's 25th birthday, unless written consent to destroy the records or written request to destroy the records is received from the parent or, where applicable, the adult student. The district shall inform parents when personally identifiable information collected, maintained, or used in relation to the provision of special education for the student is no longer needed to provide educational services to the child. The information must be destroyed at the request of the parent. However, a permanent record of a student's name, address, and phone number, his or her grades, attendance records, class attendance, grade level completed, and year completed may be maintained without limitations. 34 CFR 300.624. The district shall maintain a copy of the individual's educational plan, IEP, that was in effect prior to the student's exit from special education until the student's 60th birthday. The district shall provide a parent or, where applicable, an adult student with written notification of the district's documentation destruction policy upon the student's graduation with a regular high school diploma or the transfer of rights, whichever comes first. The district shall provide public notice of documentation destruction policy at least annually. Litigation hold. On receipt of a notice from a legal counsel representing the district in that a litigation hold is required, the routine destruction of governmental records, including paper or electronic records, which are or may be subject to the litigation hold, shall cease. Destruction of records subject to litigation hold shall not resume until the district has received written directive from legal counsel authorizing resumption of routine destruction of those records in accordance with the retention requirements of this policy as associated procedure. Right to know request hold. On receipt of the record right to know law requests and to inspect and copy of governmental records, the superintendent shall cease any destruction of governmental records which are or may be the subject of this request. The records shall be retained regardless of whether they are subject to disclosure under RSA Chapter 91-A, the Right to Know law. If a request of an inspection is denied on the grounds that the information is exempt under the chapter, the request materials shall be preserved for no less than 90 days and until a lawsuit pursuant to RSA 91-A:7-8 has been finally resolved. All appeal periods have been expired, and a written directive from legal counsel representing the district's authorization destruction records has been received. Do you need me to read references to, or is that sufficient? Thank you. Any questions that I can ask about the policy?
Are there questions from the board? Chris? Okay, so, Cinda.
Two little things. One little thing. Is there a reason down in the second paragraph where it says the district shall retain a student's special education records until at least the student's 25th birthday unless written consent to destroy the records or a written request to destroy the records? Could we say or a written consent or written request is made to destroy the records? Just to make it a smoother sentence. It's a
Would you just put that down on a piece of paper and give it over to me? And
Yeah.
so on. This particular, I do want you to know this
this particular policy, we felt some of the sentence construction was awkward and went to rewrite it and got told by the New Hampshire School Boards Association attorney not to play with it. Now, that wasn't that particular sentence, but I just mean we had already looked at construction. So if you will just give it to me, then we'll have just a word with council just to make sure.
Okay, so there's that one, and then the 60th birthday, the retaining of the last IEP till a student's 60th birthday, is that state law? Is that what that is?
That's in the new laws and regulations.
By the state?
Yes, that's in the new state laws and regulations. Yes,
Okay.
it is. Yeah, that was. There was some conversation around, what happens to them after, and to store that electronically is possible to do that, and as long as the provision to store it electronically was there, it's okay.
Okay, so that's out of our control. That is a state law that we need to abide by. Yep.
Andy?
So just to check, when you were reading the legislation and talking about destruction, you referenced a couple of times the 21st birthday, and this policy represents the 25th birthday. What's correct?
I may have misspoke. It's the 25th birthday.
So both the legislation and our policy are consistent?
Yes, they are consistent.
Okay.
Yes, they are.
Thanks.
I apologize if I did that.
Are there any other questions on this policy? Seeing none, we will have a second rendering at our next meeting, and if all goes well, we will adopt it under consent in the meeting after that, which will be the first meeting in November. Excellent. Thank you, John. And we are on to item number 5, which is the board's response to the proposed capital improvement plan from 2018 to 2024. At our last meeting, Matt went through extensively and gave us the awesome spreadsheet that has the bonded debt with it, all of the capital plans that were reviewed by the Planning and Building Committee as well, going from the 2018-2019 year through 2023-24. Are there any questions, comments, proposed revisions? Andy?
So my only caution is, given our conversation earlier in this board meeting, is that it's unclear whether anything we may be talking about would affect the 18-19 budget. But more importantly, when we present to the the planning board, they need to understand that we're looking at something that could impact this. Now, I know we won't change it. I mean, this is why I asked about the timing, because if we go in a few weeks, and I'd like to go again like I did last time, I thought that was great, to present, we don't know when we might as a board decide that we want to modify something based on the Honeywell proposal. And more importantly, if we as a board get more information, this plan could change, but likely probably not till next fall. I guess it's done annually more than anything else. So I guess my only to close on this is it would be good when we articulate this to the planning board that we are looking at those sort of energy efficiency savings as part of future updates or something. So,
Marge?
I'm going to say from my perspective, and I certainly want Matt to weigh in, the projects that are listed for 2018-19 have been on the CIP for a period of time. And all of these, to me, are very important, and in some way or other, they have been vetted already. So in other words, I think the taxpayers have some knowledge of these projects and know of their importance. So in my world, this is our first consideration because they are things, roofing needs to be done always. It protects your assets. The paving at Thornton's Ferry, we have put that off to a point now where it really needs to be done. The bleachers by the track, we know that they are slightly listing, and to me, that's just a safety and it's just a need. I mean, we have lots of people that attend our events, and we want them to be safe and secure. And then, obviously, you're committed as a board to technology and have been. So those considerations are the most significant. We have laid out for you a vision of what needs to happen in the district relative to these energy projects. And basically what I heard you say tonight, at a minimum, is we need to gather some baseline data, whether we do some air quality testing and some further extensions of that. I would love to think that you would come back, it could even be the next meeting on the 16th of October, and task us with having Honeywell and our air quality experts go and do these kinds of studies and make the year of perhaps 18-19 the year of getting all this data gathered with the idea that we infuse it into the next plan. I didn't want to say that right then because I felt like we need to do a little bit more discussing. And you still have the SAU Student Services structure to consider about what might be done there, whether it gets placed this year or next year. The point is that's on the forefront too of your thinking. Tonight, it was important for us to lay this out though, because Wally knows a lot about our district, and he literally came out of retirement to do this work in our district. So we wanted to take advantage of that. But I really think what you've said to us at a minimum is gather your data points, you know, and also show us what might be done for this scenario. Would you hit ventilation first, or a little ventilation and lights, or what do you think makes best sense? Is that pretty much?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think I agree with your approach. It's just the timing was kind of interesting because it's really good food for thought and things we need to go, but it also will affect our capital improvement plan. But my fear is, and my belief is, it's not going to affect it for any sort of review or any deliberations that we do, but it's more forward-looking. Even though the examples he gave talked about starting in FY in 18-19, I think that might be too aggressive for us to consider in some of those scenarios.
And we kind of said that too when we sat together. We said and we had so talked to Jim about debt. You know, it really, we think it's pretty exciting to think that this district could be clear of debt in 24. And we've talked openly about that. And when you think in terms of that being like 6 years away, that is just an amazing thing. We've said that so much that we said we don't want, we don't want to go beyond that. That's a marker in time. So if anything, another year out, we could look at what could be freed up within the bounds of, even if you look, we've already got window replacement down here, so it's not like that's a lost topic. But we could come back and look at some lights and ventilation too, and just make these some new lines. I think to add it right now confuses everything. Yeah. And so the focus should be on what we continue to have said.
Okay. Since this is kind of a working session, something you brought up at last meeting, Marge, and I had it on my notes as well, and I think it has a lot of value, and that is moving the JMU's bleachers in the Smith Gym from 1920 to 1819, based on things like ADA compliance and the keeping whole what may happen in 1920 for the roofing at JMU's, and also the drainage and also the paving. So there's a lot going on at JMU's. I think it would also put a little less stress on the facility and accomplish our goal of that safety factor as well.
And if
Go
I
ahead,
could, I
please.
want you to hear Matt, because he's done some more investigation, and given that Mike isn't here, you might recall that he also raised up that he wanted to know what would it be to replace the bleachers in the all-purpose room at JMU's as well. So Matt has done that investigation. No, that's not really even down yet, because that wasn't one of the primary considerations, but I want you to know that Matt has done that. So if you wish to plot that in an outline here or whatever.
If you look at your chart on 1920, I'd like to revise that number based upon some new quotations that we just received to, instead of $140,000, $155,000. And if you're looking at the bleachers in the Smith Gym, they go 9 rows up. The bleachers in the James Mastrocola Upper Elementary School all-purpose room go around 4 rows up. They're a lot less steep. And so the cost to replace those would be $100,000. So that's information you don't even have plotted anywhere on your sheet because it was a request we got last time we were here together. So the only one really is pertinent if you're looking at J Muse in the Smith Gym. The new price for that would be $155.
Okay. Cinda?
I would agree with you, Shannon. If we're concerned about safety with those, then it might put a little more emphasis on moving that up a year rather than waiting on those.
So on that note, then I will make a motion that we move the J Muse bleachers from 2019-20 to 2018-19. Do I have a second? Seconded by Naomi. And as far as discussion, and by the way, that would put the 18-19 capital improvement plan at this point to $1,489,046, considering the $15,000 adjustment. I definitely think we want to talk safety. We want to talk, again, I think it's a good timing to get one internal project outside of JMU's as they're doing all these external projects projected for the next year. That I think it's going to be a lot to get accomplished with all those moving parts. So for that, I think it's appropriate to make that adjustment. So, are there any other comments on the motion? Seeing none, we'll put the motion to a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, none. The motion carries 4-0-0. Are there any other edits to the capital improvement plan as presented? Andy?
I would just like to state for any of those watching from home that this plan, the way it is, I want to the superintendent mentioned it, but there is no SAU SPED office currently in this plan, as we allow some other options and things to present themselves. Whether we as a board decide to insert something into 18-19 is something that's yet to be determined, I think, based on the data. But I want to make sure that people understand that there is no current SAU / SPED office building in this capital plan until we have more data. So it was just more of a statement than in the record.
Sounds good. And knowing that the motions are done, I think there's always still that open conversation about the 2020 and 2021 field upgrade item that we as a board are going to keep addressing that topic about, how we're expecting funding to happen, and we're going to keep that conversation going. And with that, I think, that's definitely one that I think we need more conversations on, communication on, not just with our parents and students, but with the community at large, because it really is a community asset, and it definitely has a lot of residual benefits to the district. And then also, when it comes to funding, the Planning and Building Committee did a great job of getting some research to us about how other communities have funded that and how we may want to look at funding that, so we're not asking the taxpayers for the whole thing. We looked at sponsorships and underwriting and appropriate resources to reach out to, those kind of things. And then I think we also talked about, fields needs, and it's been going on for many, many years. That how would a comprehensive field like this address some of those? So, Andy.
So actually, that's not related to that. I agree with you, because the
Okay.
planning, it needs to be in this, whether it's in 22, 23, or 2021. It's still going to be discussed, and we'll fine tune it. But Matt just said something that we didn't do anything about. We agreed to move the Smith Gym bleachers into 18-19.
Right, and that was based on the feedback on safety.
No. But then he also said he gave us an estimate for replacing the JMU's APR bleachers, but we didn't do anything about it.
Well, we always have the opportunity.
No, that's what I was.
Yeah, it's called a motion in a second, and
So
then we can have an opinion.
I was bleeding up to it. Right? I was bleeding up to it.
I'm setting you up to spike the ball there, Andy.
So I guess the question that I have is I'm going to make a motion that for discussion that maybe we vote on, that we've already moved JMU's bleachers in Smith Gym to 18-19. I propose that we create a new entry in 19-20 and call it the JMU's APR bleachers with $100,000 to add into the capital plan that we present to the planning board.
Do I have a second? Seconded by Cinda. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Well, I think that, the thing we're worried about is the next year, because that's what's going to show up in the the warrant and things like that. I think that if we as a board believe that we're going to seriously look at replacing those bleachers as well because of their age, that we need to put it somewhere in the plan. Now, my stake in the ground is put it in 1920 because of the safety theme. We could choose to put it in another year, but I really wanted to talk about it as a board. I know Michael's not here and he wanted it, but sort of I know he would want to see it somewhere in this plan. So,
Cinda.
The only thing I can think of regarding that, and I would support that for exactly the reasons that Andy stated, would be, if there is any economies of scale, if we did them at the same time, if there's anything that made it worthwhile, for us, should we look at them together?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not, but I can't help but say it.
No, I think the job in and of itself of the Smith Gym is large enough to stand on its own. I don't think you would gain anything by having the same crew here for an extended period of time doing two gyms at the same time.
Okay.
No.
Okay. And on that note, I'll be killing my surprise for later, but with budget messages. But I think that when we're talking about some of these projects where we call them safety versus imperative, versus good idea, that we may want to look at warrant articles for some of this stuff too. So when it comes to things like the Smith Gym, I think there's definitely has presented a safety concern. When it comes to the APR, because it's fewer risers or fewer benches up, that may not present the same safety concern, but it may present a good to have. So those are things we can discuss regarding, do we want to move it, where do we want to put it, and maybe put it as a warrant article. Andy.
Well, so obviously the next discussion point we're going to have down the road is which of these things that are in the capital plan do we keep in the operating budget versus what we break out.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be a whole different discussion, I think. But I will tell you that my sorry but rear end has sat on those bleachers in the JMU's APR since at least when I was in 6th grade in that space, if not before then. So I know that they're probably there and solid and things like that, but they're used by everybody in the town when we have town meetings and things like that. I think that if we're going to really treat safety, then we need to take that in consideration, because it's more than just us at a basketball game. It's the town when we get together as an entire entity. That's where we end up. So that was my thinking about it, is that part. So.
Okay. So seeing that, we have to put the motion to add $100,000 for the JMU's APR 2019-2022 vote. But before we do that, there's just only one thing I would say is, again, I think one of the things I wanted to do when we moved that $155,000 was we're doing the drainage, the parking lot, and the roof at JMU's. So leave the inside of the building alone. So that's my only hesitation. As a placeholder, yes, but that year just to me says that it's going to be a lot of interior work at the time of a ton of exterior work at JMU's. So it's something to consider as we're balancing our projects. So I'll call it my pause.
Well, if you're doing work on the outside, nobody else can get in except maybe the workers anyway. So.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. They're trying to pave, but you're trying to bring in bleachers. So that was really my point, because you're talking the same area.
Okay. Do you believe, Mr. Assistant Superintendent for Business, that this would be an issue?
We've coordinated some extraordinary things over the summers. I think we could coordinate that.
And we'd have a year to figure it out, but still.
Yeah.
I figured that was a lot going on. So if we could have alleviated some of that and created efficiencies, that wouldn't be a bad thing. So we still have a year to figure it out and wiggle it around. So.
If he says we can do it.
Well, yeah. And then Tom will give him the evil eye when we're not looking. I know he's such he's a trooper. So with that, we'll put the motion to a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, none. And wish Tom luck on that whole juggling the projects. So with that, do we feel that the capital improvement plan is to our liking? So I would move that we accept the capital improvement plan as amended. Is there a second? Seconded by Andy. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye, and you have a capital improvement plan until we see it again. So we'll see what Honeywell does to that. It'll be a fun exercise next year. So we are on to item number 6, which is the preparation for joint meeting with town council, suggested dates and topics. So I did get an email from Michael on dates that were available for him. It was mostly in October, and I know when we were talking more November. So with that, there's I think a couple of dates that don't work for him. The 6th does for him, and I'm going to look at the dates as well, which is actually our meeting night. So, so on that note, we're all busy here. So we will have to find time, maybe the week of the 13th, if possible, as well, that you may have some dates. So knowing that the rest of that week would be out for Michael, are there any dates in the first half of November that work, knowing that when we get close to Thanksgiving, no one's around? Andy?
Generally speaking, my only evening commitments are school-based commitments. So I believe that there potentially is a conflict on November 2nd for safeguard
Okay.
for me. But other than that, other than the board meetings,
Veterans Day.
well, yeah.
You have Veterans Day for closed, which, are there any other dates where, Cinda?
I'm good for all dates right now.
Okay.
The only thing is I will have some business travel that will come up that those dates have not been finalized, but I can try to steer around them if I can. But I just want to give you that disclaimer.
I think we're all sort of in that.
We all have the footnote, right?
Right, exactly.
Naomi?
I have the same footnote about changing schedules, but Wednesdays are not available for me.
Wednesdays are out. Okay, so if I will throw some dates at you, you'll throw some dates back, make sure it works, and we will offer the town council 2 dates that we would be available to meet. And on topics, that was the other part of it. If there are any topics, I know Mike talked about fields. We definitely want to talk about water. Are there other topics that we want to bring to the council? Cinda?
I mean, I would say at a high level, the O'Gara Drive property, I just make sure we're on track. Maybe outline the timeline of that. You know, I think just mostly for the public's sake of basically, because we've had a number of conversations about that property over the last 2 years, let's say, and I think be able to put that timeline together would be really helpful, and to recap that, and also to confirm that we're on track for the dates that that we've agreed on already.
Andy? Oh, wait, Marge. Okay.
The position of SRO at the middle school, which is a part of Merrimack Safeguard, that's getting closer and closer to the end of the grant. So you remember we've had discussions with the town council about, are they still committed to that? And the chiefs have changed or in the process of changing. So I think we really need to get that ironed out, because that's so significant for the middle school.
Agreed. Andy?
And also a reminder there, the good news is part of the co-leadership of the police department, I'm assuming it's still co-leadership, I'm not sure, yeah, is on safeguard. And there's also this requirement for that grant that over the period of the 5-year grant, that slowly the government entity starts to fund that. And we don't just do full funding with the grant and then we just shut it off. We've got to show evidence to the grant providers that we're starting to. So I think that's a very valid point, that we need, somebody's budget needs to show funding for the SRO now. We probably should have this year, but we need to show it at least for next budget year.
So Mark is suggesting, I mean, this is the 9th year, so that means there's 1 more year of the grant left.
So we're already in deep doo-doo.
Well, we've talked a lot,
I know.
but it's like getting it down
We
on
just
the
have to show
page.
we have to show evidence that we're doing it that way. But anyway, it's an important point, I agree. So,
Okay. Cinda?
And I think one more thing too is to thank the town council and to relay praise to the police department and how well they partner with us, the school district, and to recap some of the events, like the way they handled the dog coming into the schools and the way that they partnered with us is really, I think we're really lucky to have the support that we have and the kind of police department that we have in this town.
Definitely. I think they even come to the school, all the elementary schools, and read to the kids as well. So there's always that continuing engagement. So we're very lucky here. Andy?
Yeah, so two things, and I sent you these, so you got it, but I'll just state it out, is that I want to make sure that when we talk about the O'Gara Drive property, that we're very clear about some of our, we have to cover for the public, and even I think some of the town council members, how we got here. That what the agreement is, how the agreement ends. I think it's important that whenever we talk about it, we remind folks about what it is, because in social media, everybody tends to forget what the underlying agreement is and why some of the decisions are that were made. I'd like to also, as part of that, remind the town council that one of the factors for us around the skate park was the decision to not fund the monitor anymore at the town level, which means it's unfunded. So the on-school property, unfunded, which has been a sort of sore spot, at least for me. I know some of the other members of the board for a few years now, that's important. So that's one of the things. The other thing I'd like to do is just get a validation check to make sure that our agreement with the town around the polling places is still working, and if they see any issues with that, because we had the discussions, we came up with a plan, we've gone through a few elections. I know we've had the moderator come and talk, but I think it would be good to make sure that that everybody's okay. Even if it's a 30-second, everybody's nodding, we're cool. I think it's good for us to touch base because it was a topic at previous joint meetings. So.
Definitely. And just to add one thing, not only did they retire the position for the skate park, but they also declined our request to put in cameras to monitor it. So we don't have any insight.
So it's that history that needs to really be
absolutely.
known. Absolutely.
So on that note, we have fields, water, O'Gara, SRO at MMS, safeguard and funding, long-term, that position. Grant requirements for safeguard, from the safeguard federal grant, so showing the self-sustaining initiatives.
Which is the SRO tied
Right.
to that.
Right. So, but showing what we're doing with the funds that aren't SRO related. And polling places, the update, is the plan working? Are we content with the way things are going? Is this the long-term strategy? Do we see anything else? This does not close the door. If something comes up, drop me a note. What I'll do is I'll work with Marge, just have a set-up meeting, finalize dates, have a set meeting with the town manager and Nancy Harrington, the chair of the town council, and we will prep for a productive evening, whenever that evening may be. Okay, and we are on to item number 7, which is Timmins property update. The original posted agenda item had Mike Thompson doing it, but Andy will be presenting in his stead. Thank you, Andy.
Sure. Let me get a drink of water first here. So, Mike really wanted this agenda topic, but I do have some background because the Timmins property is a little bit of a history. The Timmins property is school-owned property that is at essentially the intersection of Babusick Lake Road and south of Babusick Lake Road, and that area of Merrimack at the very sort of far western end, or in the northwest corner. It has come up in discussion several times around being able to use it for fields, athletic fields that are used by both the school as well as the town entities and things like that. The Planning and Building Committee had one of their charges to go look at fields and come back with a recommendation, of which Rich Hendricks and crew came back and felt that we might be able to put a field, but they felt that it was very hilly, not really good access in and out, concerns about the corner on that sharp curve there with south of Babusick Lake Road. Apparently in parallel, and this is where Mike comes into the equation, is that in parallel the Park and Recs Committee has been talking about fields, and they, as part of the Park and Recs, also walked the field to look at it and has a bit of a different opinion about whether the field is, the property is usable for fields. So the request that Mike was coming to our board on is the Park and Recs would like the permission of the school board to have someone simply survey the property for boundaries, elevations, and things like that, so there's a baseline, sort of an unbiased baseline, and that the work to do the surveying will be done without any funding by taxpayers. The Park and Recs is looking for a way to channel Matt Chevenel's winning friends and influencing vendors to maybe do some work pro bono or through some other methods to be able to get a baseline of survey of the property. So essentially, Mike is requesting our permit, the board giving permission for the Park and Recs to arrange to have it surveyed, of which the results of such a survey would be then given to the Park and Recs, Planning and Building Committee, School Board, and then to be able to then carry on potential future discussions about the viability for fields. So that's what the request is.
Are there any comments, questions? Cinda?
I'm trying to think of the off the top of my head, like the pros and cons of doing that. So I'm just kind of talking out loud for a second,
Okay.
trying to think of what that might be. You know, what the cons would be, for example, of allowing such a survey. I'm just wondering if anyone can think of any.
Well, I have two questions I wrote down in preparation for this evening, and I'm doing this because I use good penmanship. Okay, so the first question I did write was, is the town open to paying for a survey with no promise to access at its place? So whether it be free or not free, it's time and sweat equity. So are we spinning wheels? And then the next question was, does the town expect us to hand it over for them to build fields if it made sense?
So
Because we haven't made any overture to
right,
that.
my understanding is that the Park and Recs committee is going to find a way to get this done without taxpayer impact from the school or the town side. That's what they said.
Okay.
And the second piece is that the whole idea is to just have a baseline that all the bodies can have in front of them to be able to have discussions where there's not he said, she said sort of facts on the table. Because right now there's, depending on who walks the property, there's difference of opinion as to the viability. I don't think there's any commitment by this request that the school commit to doing anything except have a better idea of what it looks like, and then we can get into the discussions after that. That's the intent.
Okay. I see Matt, definitely. Maybe Marge? I can't tell. So- Okay. I saw the very corner of my eye. I'm like,
Well, as far as the survey, you can, I don't think I could get anything for free on this. It is around 40 acres, I believe. At one point in time, the boundaries were flashed with orange paint and whatnot. But to do a survey and to do any sort of field placement on there, you really need to look at the wetlands, and it's just not walking around. It's hiring a soil scientist to come over and look at the wetlands. Kind of like when we did the middle school years ago, we had to hire a certified soil scientist to come and do a whole presentation for the planning board, for the school board, and the state of New Hampshire too, because we're going to be encroaching on some wetlands there. And I know there are some wetlands there towards the back of the property, but it all depends on how many fields you want, what you want the layout to be, where do you want them placed, and then how is it going to impact the wetlands. Well, you don't know how it's going to impact the wetlands unless you have a certified soil scientist tell you where they are and what type they are. Because you can be looking at them, and it was a term we learned about called forested wetlands, where you don't see any vernal pools or polywogs or any of that stuff going on. It's just a different kind of forest bed floor that during certain portions of the year becomes wet, and it can be called wetlands, and that's how they classify it. And this is going back 13 years now, because it took us around 6 months to get the permit, to get the wetlands permit for the school to be built. So I'm not even sure about what the new requirements would be now. I know they were strict back then, but nowadays they could be even more stringent with wetlands. So I can't see getting a free survey for that.
Okay, I'm channeling my inner Mike here, so this is Mike talking, not Andy necessarily. I think really that would be the purview of the Park and Recs to figure out what they can afford and how they do it. I think all they're asking for is permission to have someone look at the property and be able to look at it from a surveying and whatever. It may include soil, it'll include elevation. They just want our permission to look at it and report back with the data that they have for future discussion. I don't think this request has any internal or inferred commitment of doing anything with it except to have a baseline piece of data. That's the way he explained it to me.
Okay.
Right, and that's where I think when we're talking about fields, that it may be the more appropriate conversation to have at the joint meeting than here at our table. And that's why I asked those two questions, because, again, we as a district haven't decided that, haven't made any position on what that land is to be needed for. I know when we acquired it years ago, I understand it was in case we needed to build another school or if we need to expand facilities, that was there and it was at our discretion to do so, and we had the location in place that could do it. Cinda?
I'm just wondering if maybe if someone at the table has a little more history on that land. I mean, that would be helpful too, regarding were there any stipulations when it was given to us, or how long ago did we get it?
I had more knowledge at one time, and I didn't come to the table with it tonight. I think I wanted to know what was coming forward. But what I would say in support of Matt is athletic fields to the school board and to the town council are terribly important. They're very few, and everybody wants more. So to me, it's wise to take the time to investigate a particular piece of land to see what it can sustain and to make sure that we don't make any mistakes. We're held to a higher standard than, let's say, someone else. I mean, that just seems, when we were doing the middle school, I remember something that we didn't think was going to take a lot of time, took a lot of time because of the wetlands and things that we just didn't even know about, as Matt points out, and we learned about. So to me, if this is something that you think is important to do now, then we need to look at what resources need to be put to it and do it right. Because I think if we don't do it, if we don't do proper study, it could come back and not be a good situation. So it's kind of like, would this particular space be a good space for 1 or 2 soccer fields or whatever you wish it to be?
So to answer your question, this board gave a charge to the Planning and Building Committee to do just that, to look at the viability of using the Timmons property as well as the field next to Thornton's Ferry School viability. And I think that the information that came back from Planning and Building, in my mind, it wasn't conclusive because it was not done anything other than a finger in the wind kind of thing. So I think what Mike is doing is had the conversation with Park and Rec is they want to take the responsibility to get that data. That's really what they want to get the data and report it back to all the entities so we can have a knowledgeable conversation. That's the request.
Or take it a step further.
Or take it a step further, or whatever, but to get that data, to get the facts, at least the first step.
Naomi?
I have no problem at all with another body being willing to gather the data for us, and I have no problem at all with giving that permission. But I think that we need a strong sense of what needs to be gathered in order to provide a useful baseline. And I think that Matt has put some interesting pieces out there where if somebody's going to simply walk the land and come back with a survey that muddies the waters, no pun intended, by not providing useful information, I don't know how helpful that would be. I think it might be useful for us to reach some understanding of what needs to be looked at and then say, sure, go for it.
So my suggestion is, because I see where this is going, my suggestion is that we add this to the agenda for the joint meeting and reach a conclusion at the joint meeting is what we want to do. That way you get both bodies in general that support, that'll need fields from Park and Rec and whatever. It delays the decision I think Mike was hoping for, but I think it would help answer a lot of the questions that I've heard come. So that, again, Mike's not here, so that's what it is.
Cinda?
I agree. That feels more like the appropriate forum to be able to move forward with that. It feels a little weird.
Right. Well, Parks and Rec reports into the town council, and
Right.
that was where there's a little disconnect for me because they are the ones that would have to authorize. The last thing I want to do is have them spend town council authorized money, budgeted money, to do something that isn't the right fit for us. And then again, in the long term, if we do these fields, whose fields are they?
That's
Are we
something
doing
town
a
council may-
land lease thing again? And do we want to get into that again? And so there's so many, I think, parts we need to vet as a combined governing body, that you're right. I think that's the right place to put it.
Yep.
Well, if I can just
Of course you can.
chime in. If you wanted to do a field there and the town wanted to accept responsibility for it, we would have to deed them over the land in its entirety or a portion thereof, kind of like we did X amount of years ago with the fire station in the south end of town. And the only way we can do that is by warrant article. The town conversely can give us land or sell us land. They can do that. But we as a school district are not authorized to do that unless we get a vote of the governing body,
Which is the people.
The people. Right.
So I think that the layer of the onion just got a little thicker. So again, with those restrictions in place too, let's make sure that they're willing to take on the expense that will go with that, and responsibility that goes with that, before saying, wander our land, but at the end of the day, it doesn't make sense for you to do that. So, because the taxpayer may not want that done. I think that makes sense. So we feel good about that? Okay, so I put in fields, I put in Timmins survey as a subsection of the fields discussion, if that makes total sense to you. Okay? Okay. And we are on to item number 8, which is the individual board members' thoughts regarding the 2018-2019 budget. And I figured historically we've gone around the table, given our thoughts. I've compiled them and put them into a master document. If you have something, you can email me later, so I don't have to take such feverish notes. It will be wicked appreciated, using my New England terminology these days. So, and I have Michael's. I'll read that to everyone as well. So, Naomi, would you like to start?
I'm going to have to postpone and come back in. I didn't realize I should bring a copy. I will bring it up on my phone in the meantime.
That's all right. Please do. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Just a couple of things. It always seems like we go one lap around the calendar and here we are again. It goes quickly. And so I've had a lot of experience over the last 6 or 7 years with the budget. And I would continue to ask for some of the same approaches that has been done before. I think that, Marge, you and your team, the entire team has a good handle of this community. I think that, I know for me, the important things are basically, anything that affects the safety of students, the quality of our education, and the value for our taxpayers, so getting the most out of the money that we have, being creative when it comes to solutions that we can offer. Again, maybe more to that, we may have to spend some money to save some money, but to get the best option to support the learning and safety. And IT infrastructure and communications continues to remain a focus for me. One of the things that I'm very eager to see and to have further discussions about would be the options and costs associated with full-day kindergarten. I feel like we're on this trajectory of little by little there's been more exposure to that concept, and I feel like it's worth the consideration, and we should be having some solid conversations about it during budget season. Also, technology, how it can enhance learning, allow for the greatest efficiencies. Even little things. I recently sent Matt an email regarding perhaps the ability to, in our buses, get GPS. If that was an affordable cost to be able to, and very convenient for parents. So it might alleviate lots of calls to the district, confusion, or having to get emails out when there's a delay in a bus or something like that. It's a small thing and it's a small example, but it's one way that technology can help us be efficient, as well as provide a service to the community and the parents. And then lastly, I would say I continue to want to stay focused on our CIP so that we can avoid the kick the can situations that can cause us more money in the long run. So I know that you guys have been through this before a lot. I know that you always think of these things carefully and discuss them at great length with the team. And then the other thing that's been very helpful over the last couple of years has been that listing in the priority. Is when we get into the budget cuts, which is further down the road. But I like to have that. I think that really helps when we frame the entire budget of what the priorities are from within the team and within the district. So that's pretty much my thoughts.
Okay, we're going to roll back to Naomi and then jump over to Mike and then Andy and then me.
Which is rather fun because we have a good 99% overlap in our points. So that's very nice. There were 4 things that occurred to me, and as I said, the overlap is great. The first thing that's important from my perspective is to continue a focus on resources for individualization and diverse learners. I think there's been a wonderful move towards that all students have been benefiting from, and I look forward to seeing that continue. I think that we need to continue to keep our eye on and support financially the successful initiatives that we already have in the district, such as the mental health focus, the technology focus, and things of that sort, and not just kind of lose focus on them just when they're going so well. The forward planning, I think, is marvelous for maintenance and facilities, and it would be great to see that continue as well. And one that I did not email, Shannon, to you, but that I was reminded of is the full-day kindergarten.
Oh, yeah. I'll do Michael's and then I'll go to you. So this is for Mike Thompson. I'd like to see if the district can come up with a budget that has an increase of 2% that will be minus any of the capital improvement items that were in the budget last year. Sorry about that. And also the ones that will be in this year's budget. Additionally, I would like to see what items each school would like to see added to the budget that would be outside the normal activities that they feel would enhance the educational opportunities for their school. A wish list, I guess you would say. Last, I would like to ask what it would cost to replace all the hand dryers in the schools. The ones in the schools now are inefficient and do not promote hygiene. And that's it. Andy.
Get them Dyson things in there. Blow the hands real good. Okay. So I didn't email anything. I wrote them on the back of our envelope here. I've been doing this for budget-wise for 10, 11, 12 years now. So the way that you present the budget is always good. All the things that everybody has said are there. For me, the things I'd be looking for this year is not only the proposal for full-day kindergarten, but also I want to understand the cost. And maybe, I hate to stack the agenda for this, but there's all this discussion about being able to do like town-by-town keynote to be able to fund this kind of stuff. So I think, I don't see that as a stopping point for me for full-day kindergarten because I see the value for sure for full-day. So I definitely want to see it. But I also want us to be aware of the funding opportunities there are to help offset. And I don't know whether the town council has talked about this or not at any point, but I know other towns are. So I want it to be at least on the radar screen as we discuss. I don't know the answer, but that's what I was going to say.
So let's look at that joint meeting.
If the town council says there's not enough justification for this meeting, they haven't seen the list. So anyway, obviously the capital plan is important. I think that you've done a good job with the capital plan. We know where we stand. Obviously, the big thing for us is more data around the SAU SPED building, which could impact it, as well as the Honeywell piece here that you said. But in general, you know where I stand on that one. I know that every year you look at student population to drive and impact your staffing decisions. I would like to make sure, because there's a lot of flux in the community now of building out that's happening around things like apartment complexes and other things that are happening. I know we had an update, a year and a half ago or something. Some of the housing complexes didn't happen, but they still might be. So when you look at the staffing for this particular year, if you decide that a reduction might need to be done for a position or whatever, I'd like us as administration as well as us as a board to take a step back and say, do we think this is a rubber band effect where we think it might change in 2 years or something like that? So just make sure that when you look at that staffing, that you think about that as part of it. I'll pick on the high school. I know one of our sore spots or hot topics has always been around transportation, around co-curricular, and that the idea that Ken tries to fund co-curricular the same he does for athletics. I'd like to make sure that we have some good details around how it's being used this year. Is it adequate? Is it too much? Do we see an opportunity where it needs to be more than athletics? Because I know that there was this big group that says funding for whatever else might be there that wasn't listed in the list. So I'd just like to understand if there's detail around how it's being used, if there's any other opportunities, because I want to make sure that the transportation doesn't get in the way of those co-curriculars. And finally, I know that this is we're about 3 months, 2 months, no, not even 6 weeks into the school year, and the new math curriculum is just now kicking off. I'd like to really have a very, I don't know if this is conservative or liberal, which way you approach it, but I'd like to err on the side of making sure the right materials that might be needed for the new math curriculum are in the budget. If we need new books, if we need new workbooks, new materials to be able to make this a success, I want to make sure that we're not trying to save some money by reusing something. Let's make sure that this is successful. And if there's anything, let's put it in the budget. Let's make sure this happens. Because I know last year I asked the question whether your budget will cover the potential math curriculum change. I got some yes, we'll make do, that kind of stuff. I'd like us to really be proactive about making this succeed when materials are necessary. So that's it.
I can't wait for you to transcribe that and email that to me later. So here's mine. I typed it in a font that was friendly for me, so I didn't need my glasses. So I put, to meet our mission of maintaining a productive and safe learning environment, we need to budget to maintain infrastructure and facilities, expand technology to meet student demand, and correlate expenditures with the goal of continually improving student performance. While achieving these goals, we need to be mindful of the tax burden of these expenditures and the size of the student population we are serving year over year. In parentheses, are we in an incline or decline in number of students served? All items impacting safety of students, staff, and the community should be included in the operating budget. All projects that are important but not imperative should be identified and considered for warrant articles so that the taxpayer can have input into its adoption. The budget should have detail and expenditure so it presents the request for funds in a transparent way for the board and our taxpayer base to better understand the level of required funding it takes to operate the district. Finally, the cut list is as important to us as the budget. For those items that did not make the budget, please provide us a list and the plan to compensate for not having it. When cuts are proposed by administration or the board, please be ready to discuss the consequences of these cuts to operations and educational outcomes. The budget should be accompanied by a detailed communication plan so that those who want to weigh in on the process have the means to do so through productive channels. This communication plan should include press releases so that we can get media coverage of the opportunities for our community to weigh in throughout the budget season, up to and including the deliberative session. And that's what we have. Thank you. So, on that note, if there's anything else that comes up, we will have at our next meeting, I will take all of our thoughts, combine them into one focal statement from the board, and just if anything comes up that was not in your presentations tonight that you want added, put them in red. So that way, as I put the comprehensive in, I will footnote that this came up after our initial discussions, and that it's an additional overture of the board's expectation for the budget. Does that make sense? Excellent. Does that work for you for our next meeting, March? Great. Trying to be organized. It doesn't always work, but I like it when it works out. Okay, we are on to item number 9, which is new school board policy with Marge, and this is the third review of the health education and exemption from instruction policy.
So I want to start out by saying that I really thank Mark, who gave me a hand with this policy, because you can remember that the last time we reviewed it, we had ambiguity going on, and it wasn't as clean as it needed to be. So without reading under the opt-out procedure and form, what I think you'll see is there is now a specific split of parties for students over 18 years of age who are emancipated, who can weigh in on a topic, and parents or guardians. Those are now separated, which I think makes it very clean. And then there is a definite separation on the two reasons that you would want to opt out. One would just be because of objectionable material. It could be a particular unit of study or whatever, or religious reasons or objections. So, two classifications of persons, two different topics laid out, and I think with that we have clarity, clear and concise writing, which I would hope would be very helpful to the reader. So I would say back to you, with these changes, I am hoping we have done to it what needs to be done.
Naomi.
I like the general change in structure very much. It's much, much clearer. I have one question. The phrase religious reasons or objections, is objections there intended to refer to other reasons other than religious ones?
No, to religious.
To religious
So it
only.
could say religious reasons or religious objections, if you think that makes it clearer.
Yes, because I think that last time, and I believe it partly was Mike who brought it up, the question of could parents opt out for other reasons, and is that clearly? So if...
Mm-hmm. So I've just placed
Yeah.
religious before objections.
Are there any other edits or questions on the, again, updated policy? Seeing none, the intent will be to put this on consent for the next meeting. Again, if for any reason this further discussion is warranted and we need to pull this off of consent and make it a regular agenda item, that's always an available option. So just let Marge and I know if that's your desire, and we can always make an adjustment.
Will you let Michael know that?
Sure.
Okay, because he's the only one that's, I mean, all of us are nodding here, but he may not nod, so.
Okay. And he could technically live stream this if he feels so inclined, but I can think of, more fun things to do on an iPad, like Candy Crush. So on that note, we'll definitely make sure he's aware. So on that note, we are on to item number 10, which is the New Hampshire School Boards Association 2018 call for resolutions. So we are getting toward the deadline that we would have to submit to the NHSBA any resolutions on issues that we feel are important to New Hampshire school districts that we as a board can identify. So last year we did that with the opt-out, opt-in language, which is actually, it was adopted as a platform for the NHSBA at the January Delegate Assembly and has been already used in Concord as the basis of swaying reworking of language on opt-in and opt-out for subject matter legislation. So on that note, if there's something that you feel that you would like to vet, the outline is there. It's all done online, so you don't have that same worksheet, because it used to be done by hand, and I'm just not that kind of girl anyway, so I wrote it up. But if we want to do something as a board, let's talk about it at our next, email me if there's a question, but at our next meeting we would need to present what we would want to present at Delegate Assembly.
Is there an easy way to access the current resolutions that exist so that we don't duplicate something?
NHSBA.org. So at the NHSBA.org, the entire platform is there. So it's available and updated. So if there's nothing else on that, we can move on to item number 11, which is the approval. We're on to housekeeping. We're going fast now. Approval of September 18th, 2017 minutes. Do I have a motion to approve? Made by Andy, second. Seconded by Naomi. Are there any edits to the minutes? Seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, none. The motion carries 4-0-0. On to item number 12, which is gifts and grants under $5,000 with Matt.
Thank you very much. This evening, we have a gift from Heartland Payment Services, Atlanta, Georgia, in the amount of $500 to the Merrimack School District Food Service Department. Use of funds is to help promote student participation and the use of the My School Bucks program. We thank them for their gift.
Is there a motion? Cinda?
I move that we accept the generous gift of $500 from Heartland Payment Systems with our gratitude.
Is there a second? Seconded by Andy?
I have a question.
Oh, yes. Are you seconding as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll second, but I have a question.
Okay.
So, I know many times we don't read through these, right? But when it says answer each of the following questions, question 2 under the form, it says describe any specific restrictions or requirements attached to the gift or grant. It says use My School Bus logo to promote in project. I'm assuming it is a requirement or a encouragement to use the logo, not a restriction that we can't use the logo. Would you?
They would like for us to use
Use
the
it,
logo.
okay.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine. I would agree with that. It's just
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean now.
right.
Okay.
Anyway.
Okay. So with the second and the clarification, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, none. The motion carries 400. We're on to item number 13, which is the consent agenda with Mark.
On consent tonight, we have Rebecca Spots, school counselor at Merrimack High School.
Do we have a motion? Andy?
I move that we accept the consent agenda as read.
Second? Seconded by Cinda. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, none. The motion carries 400. We're on to item number 14, which is other. First is correspondence. Is there any correspondence to come before the board? I have 3. First, we got an email from a parent regarding the homework protocol. I believe that parent was meeting with Mark before tonight's meeting and is getting their questions answered. I got an email about faxing student info, and I addressed that with the assistant principal of the student whose parent had the question to get more clarity and feedback to staff. And then we got another email regarding clarifying parent and guardians in our communications for things like parental notification or parental permission slips, data collection. That's more inclusive of the modern family structure. So, and that was also shared with the superintendent and the school board liaison to the communications committee to chew on. So we are working toward getting a resolution to all those questions. Cinda.
I just wanted to compliment you and say I like the way that you've not only included the communications that you've received, but what you did about them. I think that's really helpful to us and to the public.
Thank you. So I think it's a good protocol going forward. So we'll do what we can do. Is there any other communication to come before the board? Seeing none, we'll go to comments. Is there any Are there any comments from the board? Seeing none, we will close comments. 15, is there any new business to come? I knew there'd be one. Marge, new business for the board?
So one of the things that you like to know is what is coming up at the next meeting on October 16th. Obviously, there's a lot of rollover for tonight, but I do want you to know that the 3 elementary principals will come before you to talk in terms of all of the work that they've done relative to full-day kindergarten. They have, you remember that you raised up questions of them. I believe that was back maybe in August. And they have done due diligence, and they're going to come back and respond to your queries.
Excellent. Is there any other new business to come before the board? Seeing none, we look forward to it. And if there are any other questions that come up on the kindergarten presentation, if you could just let Marge know so that our principals can prepare for any answers that they could provide to you with any data they need to back it up. So always welcome to have that prep time. Item number 16 is committee reports. Andy?
2 things. First, there was a district wellness committee meeting that at the last minute I got pulled into a meeting. My ability to regularly attend that meeting is getting worse. So I'm going to be working with the rest of the board members to see if we can do a swap of that particular one, because I think that the wellness committee deserves better attention than I've been able to give. So for that, I apologize, but we'll try to fix it. The other piece is for Ceresc. We did not have a board of directors meeting since the last one. However, we did receive a notification from the Ceresc leadership today that effective tomorrow, I think today or tomorrow, the building on Commerce Drive that was owned by Ceresc will be sold. The sale, all the papers have been signed. The money is passing electronically through the night right now. So that means essentially that Ceresc will no longer own the building. They will retain a rental they will reside there through the end of the calendar year, largely to be able to finish up any of the catering things that they had booked. They are also in the process of relocating their Ceresc sort of program management to South River Road. It's a building that's right by, if you know where the interchange with 101 and Route 3 is, sort of opposite side of where Carrabba's is, there's a building right on that little loop. It's 165, I think, is the number, South River Road. But that's where Ceresc will be moving forward, essentially effective right away, but they'll be there full-time eventually the first of the year. So Ceresc will continue into next year doing the programs that they have, and they no longer will reside within that building as of the end of the calendar year. So it's a for those of us that have been on Ceresc, this has been a long time coming, and it's a pretty big deal. So it's a really good thing for that organization to help them focus on what they're good at. So.
Are there any other subcommittee reports? I attended the New Hampshire School Boards Association Board of Directors meeting last month, and we had presenting to us former Chief Justice John Broderick from the New Hampshire Supreme Court, Dr. Will, I have to use my glasses again, sorry, Dr. Will Torrey, who is a professor of psychiatry at the Geisel School of Medicine at Dartmouth, and Dr. Julia Balaban, who is an assistant professor of psychiatry and pediatrics also at Dartmouth. And they talked about the mental health crisis that's in New Hampshire, and the 5 signs, and they're also doing a follow-up program through Dartmouth, and Dartmouth-Hitchcock being associated with them. And actually, former Justice Broderick works for Dartmouth-Hitchcock as well in that capacity to get more mental health advocacy out in the communities and the boards. So I have shared with Dr. McLaughlin their contact information and willingness to meet with the board, the district, the mental health committee to facilitate further growth in developing protocols and programs. So that was the highlight of the day. We also met our new staff attorney, and we have obviously a lot of work getting ready for the delegate assembly. So we are in good shape for this coming year. And it was our first full meeting with our new executive director, Barrett Christina. So a good time was had. So with no other committee reports, we will go on to item number 17, which is public comments on agenda items. If there's anyone from the public to comment, then we can. And he's not moving, and we only have one person, so we're going to close it. He's not moving. So we will take a moment to sign the manifest, and I will entertain a motion to go into non-public session per RSA 91-A:3, Section 2, or Roman numeral 2, Sections A, B, and C. Do I have a motion? Made by Andy, seconded by Cinda. Naomi, how do you vote?
In favor?
Cinda?
In favor.
Andy?
Favor.
And I vote in favor. Thank you and good night.